grateful to live in the Canberra bubble. We're probably the most vaccinated city on the planet, which is very impressive. So round of applause for everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight and thanks for doing your bit to keep everyone safe. Please make sure, I think we all checked in downstairs, but please make sure you checked in on the Check In Canberra app, please. And I can't believe it's December already. How rude. Not quite prepared for Christmas yet, and it's not too far away. I do want to acknowledge that I live and work on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And please keep an eye out early next year. The Australia Institute is a proud partner of the Sydney Peace Prize, which this year went to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and we'll be having a Canberra event to celebrate the recipients of that in March next year, so keep an eye out for that one. We do love hosting politics in the pub, and we pride ourselves on making it free for everyone to attend, but it's not free for us to put on. So please, if you can, there's a donations box at the back, and you can also donate online at australiainstitute.org.au. Don't forget to grab a drink from the bar, and later you can go and grab something to eat downstairs. And thank you very much to Verity Lane Market for having us this evening. We love this new venue. Tonight we are launching a new book from the Australia Institute Centre for Responsible Tech. It's called The Public Square Project, and you can buy a copy of it down the back from our friends at Paper Chain in Manuka. This is what it looks like. It's a fabulous book. A whole range of different topics are covered from a wide variety of authors. It's a fascinating read. It's a whole bunch of things about technology that I had even barely begun to think about. So I highly recommend it. You can grab a copy down the back there. And the Public Square Project features on the Australia Institute's essential reading list for 2021. You can find that on our website at australiainstitute.org.au. It's the third book that the Australia Institute has released this year. So we had Richard Dennis's Econobabble in May and the Nordic Policy Centre's The Nordic Edge in July. The Public Square Project is edited by Peter Lewis and Jordan Guiao. You can, I think it would make a fabulous Christmas present if you're looking for something to buy for your relatives. And very shortly, I'm going to hand over to Peter Lewis, who co-edited the book. He's the director of the Australia Institute Centre for Responsible Tech, co-editor, as I mentioned. He's also written another book called Webtopia that you should check out. But some of you might know him. I know some of you here watch our webinars. You might know him from Pole Position, which we do fortnightly. So we're going to have tonight Pete Lewis running things. As I said, you might recognise him from Pole Position. Katharine Murphy, the political editor of Guardian Australia, also a familiar face for those of you who watch Pole Position, or perhaps a small show called Insiders that you might be familiar with. And Nick Davis is a professor of practice at Arizona State University and a former head of society and innovation at the World Economics Forum. Please give a round of applause.
Thanks, Ebony. If everyone wants to put their cameras on, they can use the chat. Is this Zoom, Katharine? No.
I don't know.
No, we're not Zooming. This is real life. It's great to see everyone, and thanks for coming out tonight. I should also say that after the legislation introduced into Parliament today, if there are any trolls in the room, we can come after you personally now. We'll chase your identity down and we'll take actions afterwards. Actually, thankfully, in the real world, we have norms and we have rules, and I'm sure everyone is just going to enter into this discussion in the spirit that's intended, which is to dig deep into what I think is the fine red wine of politics, which is the politics of technology and the way that the innovation that is occurring at breakneck speed is both transforming and distorting our public spaces, our democracy, and our personal connections between each other. I've been really privileged to have the opportunity to establish the Australia Institute's Centre for responsible technology a couple of years ago now, when Ben saw the opportunity for the Australia Institute to take a lead in one of probably the more burning political issues, but one of the least understood issues. And I've been proud to have the opportunity on behalf of the Australia Institute to put the case for sensible platform regulation on the table, but more importantly, put on the table the imperative to think about what change does to a democracy, to a society, and to a community. And so often the issues seem highly technical, really pointy-headed, but the human impact of technology going wrong is the riots on the Capitol. It's the vaccine misinformation, and it's climate denial. So in a way, getting our public square right in a digital world is in many ways a superstructure for getting our democracy right. We had a chat today at the Australia Institute about all their amazing programs they're doing in energy, in democracy, broader environment, and the piece around technology sits underneath all of them. So through the lockdown, we've had a great opportunity to build that discussion going. We put on a fortnightly webinar called Burning Platforms through the centre. We've launched a podcast, who doesn't, Katharine? And we've had the opportunity to sort of try to get our head around these issues. What I love about the politics of tech, it's a very open club. Everyone is working it out as we go along, and none of us are too old to get our head in the game, because what we do with tech is just as vital as what we do with the planet into the future. The two are inextricably linked. So the idea of putting the book of essays, I just got a call out of the blue from Melbourne Uni Press saying, do you want to write a book about this stuff at the beginning of the year? And I said, I don't know enough about this stuff to write a book about it, but I know some really smart people. So I put the dragnet out. I spoke to some academics, some people I just met through people I met, like Nick, and we asked them just to put their reflections down on the challenges we face at the moment. The book's kind of broken into three sections. Where we are now, how we got here, what government can do in the here and now, but more importantly, what we can imagine for the future. So I hope you get a chance to obviously buy the book and put it in someone's Christmas stocking, but also to think about the opportunities that this blank canvas of technological change offers it. And I guess our starting proposition is to just outsource this to big global tech corporations is not just naive, it's really, really destructive, and we've got to start imagining something better. So on that cheery note, we thought we'd spend tonight, I think the format of Politics the Pub is that we have a bit of a natter and then we open it up for questions. So no topic will be off limit, guys. But I thought we could start with my good friend and colleague, Katharine Murphy, who's been up at the house all this week and many other weeks. And I think one of the interesting parts of tech is that on the surface, the Morrison government has engaged in this issue. At the start of the year, they introduced the new News Media Bargaining Code, which the centre supported. It was not a normal place to be supporting the Morrison government on anything. And we get to the end of the year where they've introduced a series of propositions around online behaviour. So I guess I'm interested in you, Katharine. I know you're not a tech reporter and we're pushing you a little bit out of your comfort zone tonight, but what's your take on the way this government has approached technology and the power of the big tech platforms?
It is genuinely interesting. Hello, welcome. It's nice to see so many people out and about. Yes, it is genuinely interesting that the government has in this area been forward-leaning, certainly with the negotiation of the News Media Bargaining Code, which, if you've not followed this debate, the simple, quick rendering of it is, in my line of work, the internet destroyed our business models. and there was not really a fair distribution of revenue for content. And what the News Media Bargaining Code seeks to do is to get a fairer distribution or revenue stream around the sort of content that we create and the content that that the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and others make money out of, basically. So the government intervened because of concern that a number of news businesses were basically borderline unviable. And look, if you were a cynical person, you might say the government intervened because News Corporation was quite concerned about its future, like all of us. Look, if you're a cynic, you can say that. But in actual fact, in the implementation of the code, all media companies benefited, including the one I currently work for. So that I don't like talking much about the code because it's one of those areas where in reporting I try and steer away from something that directly benefits my employers. So I haven't really done a lot of commentary about this, and I in fact try to stay away from this issue as far as possible, but I do think it is a net benefit for society if there are a number of viable media companies that represent a whole lot of different perspectives, and that is in fact how the code has been implemented. So there's that. Then we've got the troll busting outbreak, which look, I was with the Prime Minister when he went to the Climate Change Summit in Glasgow and the G20 recently. And in and amongst other dramas, the Prime Minister was attempting to persuade other G20 countries to sort of think about abuse and trolling online. That was sort of if we had an agenda at the G20, and we almost didn't really, but that was the closest thing that we could have to having an agenda at the G20. So the Prime Minister hasn't just woken up yesterday and locked onto this idea. The Prime Minister's been playing around with this idea for some period of time. But I think, look, it's very much a zeitgeist issue, isn't it? You know, everybody is concerned in this day and age about social media, whether their kids are, being exposed to all kinds of harm in terms of bullying and body image and all kinds of stuff. It's a real talking point issue. And at the moment, the Prime Minister is very keen to find a zeitgeist issue where he can, sort of start to define what the election contest will be about. So he's sort of looking for components of we will keep people safe. That's sort of, and this is one component of that. If we can do something, not really sure what it is online, we will keep people safe. So it's sort of part of, you've got to think about his election kind of preparations as like stacking Tupperware. It's sort of like issue on issue that kind of relates to one another. So I do think it's mostly about the government's pre-election positioning. In terms of the actual ledge that Pete says has appeared, yes, there is an exposure draft. It's appeared today. If you have a look at The Guardian, we've got an explainer about it if you are really interested in what it does. But it's a long way off being introduced to the Parliament. The Prime Minister's basically saying, that he has to consult with the states, with stakeholders, i.e. the tech giants and others, although they are pushing through in order to have some legislation ready for a February sitting in the event the Parliament returns. But that you would have to rate as a fairly substantial if at this point. So that's probably more comprehensive than you needed.
That's great. And, I don't think it's any secret. The Guardian, 50 extra reporters employed on the back of the code. So say what you like about the transactional nature, but it has transformed a number of media organisations. I'm just interested more generally, Katharine, it seems weird, this Prime Minister standing up to corporate power. That's kind of not his normal DNA. It's kind of working for him, is it? And how does it work for him?
Well, he's not look, Pete, you would say that of a prototype Liberal Prime Minister, quote unquote. You'd say it's pretty odd for a Liberal Prime Minister to be seeking conflict with a major corporate interest. It's not conventional. It's not what Liberal Prime Ministers generally do. This Prime Minister is a sort of unconventional Liberal Prime Minister on a range of fronts, and I don't think he's much interested in those sort of philosophical or ideological battles that some of his predecessors, that have got some of his predecessors out of bed in the morning. I just think he's really not at all interested in it. And so I think, it's unusual in a philosophical sense, in an historical sense, but in a Morrison sense, not really unusual at all, I don't think. It's all about, it's all about messaging, it's all about storytelling. And like I said, I think, what the Prime Minister is desperately in need of at the moment is a zeitgeist issue, something that works for his broader election narrative. And so if he's got to piss off Facebook, well, who cares?
Yeah. Nick, the crowd probably doesn't know you as well as I've come to know you. So it'd be good to give a bit of an intro about how someone that spent the last decade working at the World Economic Forum has ended up back in Canberra and
on a stage with us.
Why you're on stage with these two gadflies. But I'm also interested just your observations of how Australia's playing its tech politics in relation to what's going on around the world.
Sure. So thanks, Peter. Thanks, Katharine. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Yes, as Peter said, I'm actually just back in Australia as at the beginning of this year after 18 years away, and I spent the most of that time in Switzerland working with this little outfit called the World Economic Forum that brings together kind of, global elites in the snow to sip champagne and eat oysters and kind of fix markets. At least that's the narrative that often comes from The Guardian and the Australian media here. Not to cast any aspersions. No, but it was a fantastic opportunity as an Australian who I actually had the privilege of being head of Europe and then finishing off with 5 years of head of innovation at the World Economic Forum, which at its heart is basically a stakeholder organisation, a multi-stakeholder organisation trying to create better connective tissue between civil society, government and business, which is why, despite the rhetoric, you still see every year a whole host of Australians going over there making the long trek to engage in those discussions.
And Bono.
Yeah, exactly. The work that I was doing, though, which is where I kind of started to get exposure to particularly what European capitals were doing on this, but then more globally, was I was looking at what drove innovation and innovation policy around Europe in particular. There was this deep, and there still is this deep sense of inadequacy in any part of the world that is not Silicon Valley about how you create value out of your innovation portfolio and digital products. And that was the zeitgeist kind of 10 years ago. Now it's the flip, which I think explains a little bit of why the current government here is kind of standing up to the big tech giants. It's the sudden realisation that actually we've created a whole load of structural weaknesses and danger in our societies that's now playing out in our inability to have a reasonable conversation about medical evidence and statistics during a global health crisis. So in that context, the last 5 years I've been working on building this concept of the fourth industrial revolution. So if you've heard the phrase the fourth industrial revolution before, that's my fault. That was what I worked on. And it was essentially a way of trying to create a different narrative about our technology-driven future. One that wasn't just Industry 4.0, so it wasn't just about robots in manufacturing, nor was it about the digital revolution, about how we just need to kind of give up everything and be glued to our phones, but calling, like I think what good journalism does, calling on metaphors and images and historical perspectives around times where the world completely changed. And completely changed in the case of the first industrial revolution, 1750 to about 1850, changed for the better on average, but also created huge environmental damage and deforestation. It was 50 years between the first child slavery and child workforce laws in the UK, between the time they were proposed in the UK Parliament and the time they were actually enforced. So 50 years of regulatory catch-up between 1801 and 1852 on something as simple as, should we allow people under the age of 12 to work for more than 12 hours in a mine or in a manufacturing? And I guess the argument is here, Peter, we are going through a similar revolution right now. A whole series of new technologies which take digital for granted. So we've gone through the digital revolution. Now now that everyone's connected and we've all got, twice the power of the space shuttle in our pockets that we just take for granted, we are essentially creating new ways of engaging with one another and being manipulated and tortured in some senses to the benefit of private companies in ways that represent completely new, sets of values that we don't fully understand. We haven't kind of fully come to grips with as a society. And so I guess the challenge that makes me excited about being back in Australia right now, in a country which is literally we are the prototyping capital of the world. We're the pilot capital of the world. If you want to pilot something for any OECD market, you come to Australia, because we are open to new ideas. We're multicultural and diverse. We're representative of so many other populations in small segments around the world. Got massively interesting migrant populations as well as Indigenous populations here. So if you want to pilot something, come here. And what I'm excited about is, in the spirit of the Public Square project, is piloting some ideas around how can we get better at our politics and public discussions around the future of technology. And what most scares me, to bring us back to the politics in the pub topic, what most scares me about what the government and what Scott Morrison's doing right now is the way if you listen to the government on this proposed legislation, the bill, you think it's about online trolling and bullying and harassment. But it's not. We took care of that in the Online Safety Act. That's already an act that was passed, that was updated earlier this year. If you harass or bully someone online, Julie Inman-Grant, our e-safety commissioner, will go after you. So we've taken care of that problem. What is the actual bill about? It's about defamation. At its core, it's about people being able to go after others in the courts as a result of the federal court decision, to be able to unmask their identities and have them face up to those legal remedies around defamation. And what worries me about that kind of mismatch is, first of all, well, why politically are we being manipulated into thinking this is about safety for kids when we've already done that, right? So what's the reason for that shift? That always makes me a little bit suspicious. But secondly, if it's about defamation and I look in the news about who's been threatening defamation actions on others, it's actually been politicians threatening granny groups in Queensland for saying, oh, I think you've got the wrong policy platform there. So,
and also critically media companies being
absolutely.
sued.
So just exactly. And of course, there are a number of actions at the moment against media companies on this. So I guess, which brings me to your final point, and I'll shut up and pass back to you and Katharine. When we look about how countries, how governments, whether they be local governments, state, federal and national governments around the world, are making policy at the moment, I see kind of three different groups. So three big trends. And if you Google tech policy around the world, you'll see a lot of commentary that says it's authoritarian policymaking in China, it's socialist communist policymaking in Europe, and it's liberal good policymaking in America and Australia and a few others in the US. I think that's a really ideologically divisive and unhelpful distinction. I see three different categories. I see a group of countries, a group of governments that are really focused on introducing legislation that tries to embody and give power to citizens by enshrining new rights into law. And I would put the EU's Digital Markets Act, which is mostly about competition, and the Digital Services Act, which is about online behaviour, in those categories of trying to essentially define and codify new rights for citizens so that they can then be protected and have actions against whoever breaches those duties, governments or businesses in particular. And obviously the target of that are these very large online platforms like Google, Facebook. There is a whole separate group of policymaking around the world that's going on which is really about centralising power in governments themselves. So it's about taking the ability for commercial large companies to make decisions on behalf of people and saying, no thanks, we want government to retain the right to do that. So content moderation, you want to give a government the power to say, if you don't take this piece of content down within 24 hours, we will charge you criminally, right? Which the Abhorrent Violent Extremism Act, etc. So that's the second type of power. And China is doing a fair amount of that. India is also doing a lot of that. I see a huge amount of that in Australia as well, by the way. But there's a third group of countries that are out there that they're kind of doing a bit of a mix of the two. And I call those the opportunists. And those are the countries that are essentially opportunistically making policy based on, is there a good moment with the public to gather some votes, make some movement, push our agenda on? And I think Australia is, I would never have thought Australia would be right at the forefront of this topic the way it has been in the last 2, 3, 5 years. But I don't think that there is that coherent strategy. I haven't been privy around either we're doing this because we really want to give rights to people, nor, which is possibly a little bit more nefarious, we want to do this because we're here to strengthen government. I think it's much more that opportunistic pole that's going on. And I think we really need to learn from some of those patterns and strategies and investments that are happening in other parts of the world, because at the moment we're going it alone, and that's really dangerous.
That said, Nick, and I'm a total opportunist, so I shamelessly jump on the back of an opportunity to stick it up the big tech companies and are unashamed about it. But, you know, the point that is worth making is that the ACCC handed down 23 recommendations to better mediate the way that digital platforms worked, and the government moved on one of them, which was the one that put money into the media industry's pocket. And I backed it in as a first step. But what's been really interesting has been how a lot of the other initiatives on, you know, citizen data rights, on disinformation, on even ad tech have been slow walked, whereas there was this urgency when it was driving the agenda of the media companies. And again, I was prepared to back that in, but it was opportunistic. I think, you know, do not underestimate also the degree to which the trolling laws align with the need of the media companies to fix up that High Court case that shifted the liability onto media companies for posts on social media. So opportunism is how politics works. What I find disheartening is, despite having this beautifully laid out master plan to regulate the platforms, it kind of lacks the urgency. And I know that politics is hard to create moments, Katharine, but, you know, to what extent are the rest of that, you know, there was a privacy paper that handed out, it probably got a couple of minutes coverage compared to news media bargaining. Like, is there a thirst, do you think? I know that the role that the gallery places is a bit of a call and response between politicians and the public, but is there room to work there?
By room to work, do you mean is there a strategy?
To push a broader agenda, yeah.
Oh, well, look, I hope so, because there's some very serious issues. I mean, I agree broadly with the diagnostics here, and I think it's true that in part the troll busting legislation also contains a fix for media companies on the Voller decision, which again, I'd just encourage you to have a look at. Have a look at The Guardian. There's a good explainer if all of this is double Dutch. So that's true. And I do think abuse, you know, as somebody who cops a shed load of it, is a big issue. And I think it is a big issue for a lot of people. I don't think it's the most important issue. I think from where I sit in the democracy, misinformation and disinformation is a much bigger problem because that is a slide into a parallel universe where facts and evidence don't inform debates, And I think the whole business model of the platforms, the algorithmic business model that heightens conflict, sensationalism, conspiracy theories, in order to attract engagement, eyeballs, and sharing, is corrosive to democracy. I think it's a really huge problem. I don't think there's an easy fix to that problem, which is why we haven't seen the opportunistic burst into the marketplace with a fix. I'm not downplaying people's experiences with abuse, because some of it is genuinely terrible. You wouldn't believe some of it. And, you know, a lot of people very upset by that. Also, I think one of the while I absolutely agree with the diagnostic, I think it is opportunistic, and there is no strategy here. There is no holistic strategy, which is actually what we need. And I totally agree that this is a defamation advance in a troll mask. But I think one of the biggest advocates actually for this in the government is a woman called Anne Webster, who is a Nationals parliamentarian from regional New South Wales. And funnily enough, she's been trying to convince Paul Fletcher, the communications minister, to do this for the best part of 2 years. And until recently was told by Fletcher to nick off. But she had a terrible experience, an absolutely searing and terrible experience, where an online figure basically accused her husband and members of their extended family of being a pedophile. And she lives in a small town in regional New South Wales. The people involved in this action had some linkages with some movements that are obsessed with these issues. The abuse was coming from an account that was offshore. It's not like being called a pedophile in Sydney, where you can walk around and 3 million people don't know who you are. In a small country town, you walk around, everybody knows who you are. And a lot of this campaigning was boosted and directed in geolocated. So I'm just saying that it is this, but it's a little more complex than that.
It can be opportunistic and genuine at the same time.
And genuine at the same time, which is the elixir in politics, is opportunism overlaid with sufficient truth to believe what you're saying, if you're very cynical. But no, I'm just saying, look, that there are issues there. I don't know whether this proposal will fix them. And like I said a minute ago, I do not think that this is the biggest problem that democratic countries face, even though the toxic environment of social media, where I spend a lot of my time, is corrosive to people's mental health and sometimes to their reputations.
Yeah, indeed. We're going to go to questions in just a minute, but can I pitch my big idea first and see what people think, both the panelists and the room? So the big idea in this book is that we can't actually fix Facebook and we can't fix the model of surveillance capitalism, and we're naive if we think we can run our public debates and our civic spaces on the back of it. I'm horrified that more and more government departments and the public broadcaster outsource their community to an engine which is based on the extraction and repurposing of user data to make money in a way that divides people and riles them up.
And just to be clear on that, Peter, what you're saying is government departments are using Facebook to run their community discussions.
Yeah. Right. My wife got invited to a community consult the other day. I'm doing a piece on it tomorrow, and the only way to register was via Facebook. Like, you are totally giving in. So my straw man is that we need something between the private sector that needs to make money out of it and a government like China or Russia. And it feels to me a little bit like the Reithian principles that underpinned the ABC 90 years ago, when wireless technology was failing because of market failure. So my straw man is we've got to reimagine public broadcasting as a civic network where you build community, you encourage people to create, you set rules and norms, you build algorithms based on different objectives to making money, objectives to embrace difference, encourage civility, build the public square in its Reithian principles, which really goes back to the tradition of the Agora. I know Nick might jump in on this in a sec, but I know it sounds really idealistic, but we've got ABC that's in the middle of this culture war where it's all about the content, but we've lost track of what the purpose was, which was to deal with market failure in technology. And it just seems to me that reimagine the ABC as this space where, yes, the ABC could produce content, but why couldn't local producers as well, individuals, The Guardian, even Murdoch, if he's doing real journalism, and just totally turn the whole thing on its head? Because at the moment we're going down this spiral where every year that we keep ceding control to Facebook, and there was this moment when they withdrew news during the negotiation of the news bargaining code, when it was like, well, maybe they'll get out of Australia, but no, they were back in no time, and we became more and more reliant on it. So that's my straw man. What do you reckon, Nick?
Yeah, it's interesting because when Facebook announced their name change to the metaverse, it made me at one time kind of horrified, because I don't know if you know, the idea of the metaverse is, you know, your entire being or all your virtual experiences become kind of subsumed into that platform. But I was thinking this interesting change, because when I started working on these topics in around 2009, 2010, it was the time that the Obama administration was really pushing this digital democracy project, where they were funding activists in Iran and China and others on the idea that access to social media, unfettered access to information on the internet, was going to flip these countries. You know, remember the promise of the Arab Spring,
yeah.
The fact that, you know, these authoritarian governments are turning off the internet, but you're finding ways to come around. Democracy's alive. It's gonna, and now kind of a decade later, or 8 years later in some cases, we're looking at it going, well, this is the same, exactly the same access and growth in access to the information is killing democracy, right? Is undermining, as we kind of laid out in the intro here. And I think the mistake comes from thinking that democracy is aided by participation. And I think that's a really simplistic notion of democracy. And I happen to work with a classicist, a guy called Dr. Tom Philbeck. And he reminded me recently that in early Athens, about 500, 600 BC, they had this problem of bringing together all these diverse tribes that were living, that formed a citizenry of Athens, and making decisions collectively. And so they did three really interesting things, which were not about mass participation, because it wasn't mass participation. It was essentially elite landowning men, right? That was the citizenry in that time. But still, it was a really diverse group, different languages, different cultures, different activities. And the three things were, they brought them together in a public space and what they called the Agora, and they made them do things together. So they created like collective festivals and moments. It was activity based, like a community hall, right, and a marketplace. The second thing they did was they created a common rule of law. So they had to create a bit of a common language to ascribe these norms and languages, which is what the Morrison government and others around the world are trying to do with tech regulation today. Create some better norms. Whether those norms are, then the power goes to the government or the people, as I said, that's the tricky trade-off. But the third thing they did was, for the first time, they created a public archives. They created a space where market transactions, voting records, people who were born, people who died, when they entered the city, when they left, was all recorded. Because the assumption was that by having public collective ownership of the information about who was in the city and what you were doing, was enabled people to understand each other and make decisions. And it got me thinking, well, actually, I think the metaverse, this kind of immersive virtual reality, in 20 years' time, right, it'll be there. Like we'll all be in the metaverse. Like I really believe anyone that's had a virtual reality headset on recently, it is pretty incredible, right? So we are going down that route already. The technology is coming. Maybe in 5 years we'll be all in the metaverse. But the problem is we just don't want Facebook to be running it, because Facebook's algorithm is going to be separating us into separate rooms. The data, we're not going to own any of it whatsoever. And unfortunately, we don't own the norms, the codes, the laws. It's going to be decided by someone else. So how can we as Australians be, and how can our politics be on the forefront of reclaiming that public space, of collectively deciding on these laws in perhaps a little bit more of a strategic sense, I would argue. And thirdly, how do we own our bloody data? That's the big problem that I've got.
Yeah. What do you reckon, Katharine?
Well, I think that was beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a great story.
ABC tried Second Life for a while there, so they've been in the metaverse for a moment.
Well, we're all, but you're speaking about the public broadcaster as publicly owned space, which is an important concept. I was saying to these guys before we sat up here and started yapping, I had to refresh my memory on the metaverse because I remember the hoverboard, but not much else because I've had my head full of other things. So I read an extended interview before we came today with Mark Zuckerberg about the metaverse. And again, if you want to bring yourself up to speed, just have a look for it. You'll find it online easily. He did a quite extended conversation with The Verge about his concept for the metaverse. Obviously, the platforms are not very popular in a number of democracies at this point in time. They're facing a sort of pincer movement on regulation, either well thought through or made up on the fly. Zuckerberg's pitch was that the metaverse would not be dominated by any one company. I try and constrain your chuckles, if you may. Would not be dominated by any one company. It would involve a number of companies and it would be fully interoperable. Now, again, anybody with a device, an Apple device and a Samsung device will know how ridiculous that is in terms of interoperability. Nothing works with anything else, right? So the whole environment would have to be interoperable. And also this concept, he was asked by the reporter at The Verge, so will there be public space in the metaverse? Will we have a government civic square? Will we have a publicly owned park? What actually will it look like? Or will it all be sort of some dystopian corporate billboard, of various types? And Zuckerberg said, well, of course there should be publicly owned space, of course. And that absolutely, I went from chuckling quietly to laughing out loud at that point. But it is very important. I don't know if Pete's solution is the perfect one because I'm ignorant basically on these matters, but it seems a reasonable starting point. But this whole concept, if we are to sort of evolve into this place where we will have a proportion of life IRL in real life here, and we will have another proportion of our lives in some sort of augmented halfway house between these two states. Like the metaverse, if we were sitting up here, the metaverse would be you guys are all at home with your VR
like
headsets.
on Zoom.
Yeah, well, but like Zoom, but except you would feel like you were here.
Yeah.
You would be surrounded by avatars. If you look at the people sitting next to you, you would be surrounded by avatars who were having human-like responses to what's happening. The pandemic has shown us that we're not far away from that now, but there is an extra step in order to get to the metaverse space where Zuckerberg is thinking about taking tech, or where tech will take us. And I think we do need to think about all of these things. And this is why your point about how you codify the space, going back to ancient Greece, is such a beautiful organising thought. Like, who owns the data? What are the rules and norms? Who sets them? Who enforces them? Who owns the spaces? And, is there diversity in those spaces? Are there common spaces? Or is it just some sort of corporate hellscape that none of us will want to be anywhere near? Anyway, it's fascinating.
I think it's time for questions, is it? I was getting the eyes. Has anyone got a question? The only thing I'll reflect while we wait, if there are any questions, is, the thing about the internet is it was built by engineers. And I didn't really get engineering for a long time because, I was a media politics guy. And I remember having a beer one afternoon with a couple of neighbours who are engineers saying, what do you guys actually do? And I thought they all built bridges. But one of them said they designed financial systems. No one said he designed logistical chains. And the penny dropped that engineers designed systems, and the internet is an expression of design principles. And if your design principles are how do we make money out of civic engagement, you're going to build a certain thing. Whereas if it is how do we create a more cohesive society that builds friction so that everyone isn't just reinforced as just because you are a member of the Australia Institute, that's not the only reality that is coming into your algorithmic news feed. That's a good thing. There's a great chapter in the book by Robert Elliott Smith, who's an AI engineer who grew up in Alabama during busing. And it's just that notion that there is value in friction, and you've got to build friction into systems. And if you don't, the systems become brittle. And the micro-targeting, the genius of micro-targeting actually creates really brittle systems that break, right? Anyway, there's a few questions. Yeah, go for your life.
Thank you. My thought is about the trolls. A number of politicians, I believe, have basically been trolling people using alternate. What are the implications for them?
That'd be a Katharine.
I don't know that a lot of politicians
Andrew Laming. One.
would be. I mean, there certainly are some rather celebrated examples of that, but as a mainstream activity, look, most of them do have a day job. you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, what's the implications for them? Well, we need to see the legislation in detail, and we need to understand all of those issues. I don't think the government could attempt to pass some legislation that exempted politicians as a class, perhaps. I mean, they have the biggest defamation arena in the country through privilege. So that'd be funny, wouldn't it? But I don't think that would go down very well in the harsh light of day. So call me naive, but I think that would be idiotic, and it would be called out in about 2.5 nanoseconds. So, but it's a reasonable point you make. But again, I just most parliamentarians do not have time to be setting up. Sorry to laugh. It's just so ridiculous. Setting up, kind of fake identities to either praise themselves, famously as
well
Angus
done,
Taylor
Angus.
did. Well done, Angus. Or Andrew Laming.
That's the opposite of trolling, really, isn't
it? Or Mandy Jane, which we were reminded of beautifully yesterday. Amanda Stoker's alternate online president. Anyway, be assured that they're sort of the exception rather than the rule.
Do you know the other thing, though? I reckon it's a mistake to think that your average troll is just some guy in his undies late at night in front of his computer. There is industrial scale orchestrated fake bots that are set up to spread disinformation, both internationally, but here in Australia, our friends at QUT do a lot of monitoring of tweets that move at breakneck speed, like the chain that you can just tell they're automated. And so a lot of the early conspiracy theories around COVID, the Bill Gates theory, was totally pushed out by orchestrated bot farms. Yeah? Do you want to say anything about trolls?
Oh, I just want to say that, one of the big, I don't want to say errors, but maybe challenges that I see in policymaking around the world in the tech area is focusing on the symptom and not the cause. And so when you try and, go after the person that's making a comment, right? Yes, it's an important remedy in those cases that you were talking about with the national MP. Like, it's critically important that the rule of law be able to reach that person even behind the veil of a company. I completely agree that. But it's not going to solve trolling, because 99% of trolling is automated by fake accounts. And so that bigger picture is actually the structural element you need to go after is twofold. First of all, people that can make money off it, right? And secondly, the algorithms that then channel that power back to those accounts. So if you can, for instance, manage some of the algorithm discrimination that pumps up for outrage those fake results, you can start to kind of eke away at the problem a little bit.
But that's also why I'm opportunistically up for the anti-trolling laws, just because it will force the platforms to address the fake bot accounts.
Yeah, you got every time you get in regulation. Speaking as technocrat in many ways, like you got to look at the cost on the other side. And it's if you want to create ABC's public square, it's going to be a big regulatory cost on your new project to have to continually monitor for defamation in some instances. So depending on how the legislation is designed. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get two more questions.
Hi. Speaking of your ABC public square, I've got two kind of questions, I guess, both challenging that idea. One would be, I guess, one of the big benefits of platforms like Facebook is that you can keep in touch with people overseas and get content from overseas. And that would be like, how would that happen? So that's part one of my question. The other one is, one of the issues, I follow a lot of American news way too much. That's my own problem. But, I kind of see a trend of people going, oh, we don't really trust mainstream media. Let's move on to this weird little thing. And I think, sure, the 2% of whatever people who listen to Radio National when however many watch the ABC in the first place, they might be, sure, I'll go onto this platform. But I just think a lot of people might go, oh, why would I trust these people? Because they've already in that mindset. So, I guess, and also what's going to make it fun and enjoyable to, because, why do people watch Channel 9 on a nightly basis rather than ABC, even though, you know what I mean? So I guess I'm just kind of challenging what would make it a draw for people if they can't keep in contact with global people, with overseas people, and also, the trust issue.
So on the OBC, I don't see this as a replacement for Facebook and, connections with people overseas. Like, it's just that there's part of what Facebook does that isn't suited to the way that it's set up. And I suspect they know that. I suspect if they had their dream world, they would just be the marketplace that they get out of news altogether. They've kind of been forced now, thanks to the marketing code, to re-embrace it. On your second point, I think that the trick is to be really imaginative about what you're creating. It would not be to be creating an ABC news monopoly. It would be take the principles that underpin the ABC and, a bit like you structurally separate Telstra the wires from the power, you'd have to over time separate it out and allow access to accredited journalists. So what would be the benefit for being involved in there? Either great content, great engagement, or the opportunities to create and have real input into government as well. So I can't really do it justice in 3 dot points, but I did do a whole chapter of the book, so you've got to buy it now.
Got another one over here.
Can I please direct this question to Katharine? Can you please explain, under the Media Bargaining Code, how does the revenue sharing model work? Who gets what money and where does it come from? And then who gets to decide who's in the club?
So can I help Katharine on this? So this is the big flaw. The code was passed as law, but it isn't actually enforced because that whole hoo-ha led to both Google and Facebook saying, we will do deals with the media companies if you do not designate us. So there are a couple of bugs in here. One is, and it's totally right, we don't know because all the negotiations are commercial in confidence. We know there's a fair bit of money because they've hired 50 more journos, but
We don't know as employees of the company. We don't know. None of us know.
But the second flaw, which will become more apparent, is that under the legislation, there was a designation mechanism that ACMA would, for the first time, I think, register public interest journalism. And there's about 28 small publishers that have been registered by ACMA, and Facebook and Google have said, we don't accept that because you don't meet our criteria. So there is a fair bit of friction there. So This is in no way perfect. There's going to be a 12-month review, February, March next year. Money's gone into the media from the platforms tick, but the designation has never occurred. And, you know, to be honest, I think that show of strength is probably ensured that it never will occur. And so there's been an intervention that shifted the power a bit, but it hasn't actually solved the bigger problems. And to Katharine's point before, the other issue is we don't know not just how much money, but what the deals with on what the platforms had to do for Google and Facebook for that money.
Oh,
so
no, we know.
we do know that.
No,
You've got to make it nice for them.
No, we know a little bit about that. And I presume the jobs that have been created across the industry have similar characteristics. The jobs are for designated activities, and so it's not just a wad of money where media companies can go to lunch with. There are a number of positions that perform certain functions, or audiovisual. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of categorizations for those jobs. But yeah, I don't know the quantum. I'm being completely honest. I don't know the quantum in my own organisation.
Let's not go down that wormhole totally. We've got one more question, but we can continue that discussion at the bar. Last question, if anyone's got one.
I'll go here.
This man's, but you can do it at the bar for sure.
No, we should be. This man's had his. Yeah.
Oh well, two more questions, quick ones though. We'll be brief. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Quick comment. What I've heard so far, thank you very much. All the comments so far is that technology is a piñata for a range of other social ills. Whether it's the outsourcing of government functions to Facebook, the issue is not the platform; it's a small part of a much broader function of outsourcing. And the APS is now the public service. It's incapable of delivering services to the public. It outsources everything, including to Facebook.
Yeah.
Loads of nasty things spread online, and people organise lots of stupid things like QAnon conspiracies to raid the Capitol. But since antiquity, people have been falling for religion. And in our society now, we normalise religion. We give it tax breaks. And whether we live in a society where religion is normal and resources are diverted to a private school system, and we're under-resourcing public schools, then we're getting close to the problem of the issue is not the bots, the issue is not the disinformation, the issue is that we believe it. And it's our critical thinking that's the most important thing, and not the means by which that message is delivered. That's the comment. So I disagree with a lot of what you said.
Yeah, that's great. Nick's first line in his essay kind of sums that up, doesn't it?
Oh, the fact that technology policy today is overly obsessed with technology. And I think you're right. There's a lot of deeper issues there that we need to be tackling with. The other aspect of this is now technology policy becomes everything policy, right? Because it represents all those outsourcing elements that you mentioned.
But I'd push back that it's not just a benign relationship. Like the design of these platforms have implications as well. But then it's on us how we use them. I totally
absolutely. Surveillance capitalism is a thing. However, our susceptibility to it is a community choice, and we can do better. But the question is public-private key cryptography.
Oh,
this is the thing that can sort of achieve that sort of public space. Our ability to have our data distributed amongst us, not withheld by government and sort of sorted and filtered and amalgamated.
Yeah.
But cryptography is both perceived to be a bad thing by government because it allows anonymity, but it's actually a good thing because it allows anonymity and privacy. And I'll be looking forward to a bit more of a discussion, perhaps about that at the bar.
I'd love to take that forward at the bar.
All right, we'll give our friend the last question, and then we might go around with a final optimistic comment to finish it off.
Sorry, I didn't see you.
Yeah, I was just curious if you saw any downside to eliminating anonymous accounts. Why wouldn't we just require everybody to at least be traceable by Facebook or Twitter? That would relieve them presumably of the stress of dealing with defamation, because then they just say, well, it was this guy. And then wouldn't that reintroduce a bit more civility in the discussion?
Look, reflexively, I have an enormous amount of sympathy with that. As a person who has to participate in the public square who is visible, who is identifiable, who is accountable, who is responsible. It irritates me that that those rules don't apply to everyone, but there are genuinely good, valid reasons sometimes why people seek a cloak of anonymity in order to participate in public conversation or to share information that would obviously breach, share information in the public interest, I should say, that would otherwise breach their employment contracts, for example. There is a case for it, but I absolutely understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
You design it into the system.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, people, believe it or not, still do that, old school. But no, there's a case. There's a case. I do think, look, you've got to have 100 points of ID for everything else that you do in your entire existence. It's sort of, at one level you think, well, why not? Why not? What is the case for, if this is the norm for, registration for any sort of service or any sort of participation? I mean, we all checked in tonight. Why not? But I accept that there are valid exceptions to this rule, and that is, you get into complex policy-making territory when you hit the exceptions.
Just a quick roundup, Nick.
I think the three reasons why it's important for us to be talking about these issues. Number one, because we want to reap all the benefits of technology. Like, there is just so much great stuff happening. I'm seeing so much in biomedical research. Like, hopefully, thanks to technology, we will all be here in 30 years in person, not in the metaverse, right? There's the breakthroughs of digital medicine these days, incredible. So let's get onto it because we want to reap the benefits. Secondly, there's a distributional problem around the world with technology and the benefits from it. Industrial revolutions are not evenly distributed in time or space. So let's figure out a way to make sure that as many people as possible get to do it. But the third issue is we do know that along the way, at any revolution, we create a whole host of issues, externalities, harms around. We exclude people, we create environmental damage, we put people literally into slavery, we manipulate people. Happens all the time. It's going to happen exponentially bigger and at scale if we don't get some of these issues right. Let's focus on the positive, but let's not let it kind of, go out and ruin a lot of people's lives along the way if we could have done the right steps policy-wise. And let's take responsibility. I think someone said it before. Let's take responsibility ourselves because, this is all of us in the room have the ability also to act better and do less trolling. I've got my eye on all of you.
All further questions at the bar where Michael Cooney's about to shout everyone in the room. Excellent.
Thank you very much, everyone. A big round of applause for our panel this evening. Just a reminder, you can purchase the book, The Public Square Project, up in the back right-hand corner of the room. Well, my right. What's that? Stage right, do I say? Back corner of the room, right next to the bar, conveniently located. Thank you so much, Peter Lewis, Katharine Murphy, and Nick Davis. Thank you, all of you, for coming this evening. Just a reminder, if you haven't already, subscribe to our podcast, Follow the Money, and to Burning Platforms. And a reminder, Burning Platforms is on this Friday. That's the Centre for Responsible Tech's regular fortnightly public forum, shall we say, and at the special time of 10 a.m. on Friday. So you can find the details for that on the Centre for Responsible Tech's website. Lastly, I just want to thank our amazing team at the Australia Institute. We love putting on these events and they make it happen. So thank you to Tanya, Elise, Hayden, and Hannah. They do a wonderful job and we really appreciate it. Thank you again for attending tonight. This will be our last Politics in the Pub for the year. We will be back again in this venue next year. And what's the last thing to plug? Pole position. pole position with Pete and Katharine next Tuesday. It's our last one for the year. And don't forget to check out our essential reading list at australiainstitute.org.au. Thanks very much, everyone.